Well, thank you, everyone. Welcome back to part 2 of Lecture and Film, and our focus this year, or this academic year, let's say, on the work of Abbas Kiarostami. A very famous Russian once said that there are decades where nothing happens, and then weeks where decades happen. And I feel like the last few weeks since we went on pause have definitely been one of those periods where it feels like decades have been happening, certainly in the Iranian context. And I think anyone in this room with personal connections to Iran has obviously been going through an extremely harrowing period in that time. So first of all, my message of support and solidarity and sympathy to everyone in that situation. But hopefully we can also take support from the humanitarian message of Abbas Kiarostami in all of his films, including the film we'll be watching tonight. I do want to say that, one of the weird things that just kind of popped up, and the kind of brain rot feed that we're all subjected to nowadays, was a tweet from Lindsey Graham, the American senator, who a few weeks ago during the early phase of the very confident moment for the American administration about how the world was going, wrote a tweet directed at Ayatollah Khomeini that ended with the phrase, "See you at the movies. Oh, I forgot, Iran doesn't have movies." Which demonstrated perhaps a slight ignorance about Iranian culture on the part of the U.S. administration, because as it turns out, strangely enough, Iran has movies, and we'll be able to. We have been watching the films of obviously one of the great masters of Iranian cinema, Abbas Kiarostami, and we'll now have the opportunity to continue familiarizing ourselves with his work. This month, though, the DFF will also have the chance to encounter some other films by other directors of the kind of great tradition of Iranian cinema. So check out the DFF's catalog for May to see the details of those films. We've got some Kiarostami, but also works of Makhmalbaf, Saleh, and other filmmakers. It's a great opportunity to really take stock of the diversity of Iranian cinema. It goes well beyond the work of Kiarostami. But today, or tonight, we'll be watching 10, Kiarostami's film from 2002, and we have the great fortune of having our guest tonight, Maryam Ghorbankarimi, who will be presenting the film to us, giving a bit of a lecture as our format dictates. Maryam is both a filmmaker and a film scholar. So she's been engaged, making films, but also researching and teaching on film. She is associate professor in film studies at Lancaster University in the north of England, where she also leads the MA in film studies. Her research focuses in particular, and this is why it's also a great opportunity that we have Maryam talking to us about 10, on the representation of women both in front of and behind the camera in Iranian cinema. And 10 is a case where we definitely have a woman in front of the camera, and the question, to what extent is a woman behind the camera is also one of the big questions of the film, one of the controversial questions of the film, as Maryam will get into. She has published a monograph on, with the title, A Color, I'm reading my writing here, Colorful? A Colorful, The Evolution of Women's Representation in Iranian Cinema from 2015, and has also edited the collection's Refocus, the works of Rakshan from 2021, and the IB Taurus Handbook of Iranian Cinema from 2024. But now please join me in welcoming Maryam Ghorbankarimi up to the lectern. And just a quick reminder also, as our format has it, Maryam will talk to us about the film. We'll then have a 10-minute break, then watch the film on a great digital copy, and then straight after the screening, we'll go into a Q&A with Maryam. So do stick around for that as well.
Thank you so much for a lovely introduction. I'm honored to be with all of you. Good evening. I'm quite jealous of the establishment you have and the films of Abbas Kiarostami that you've been watching and continue to watch, and all these other wonderful films from the Iranian New Wave that it seems that is part of the screenings as well. I wish I was living in Frankfurt. I'm very pleased to be with you here. I have quite a personal connection also in terms of kind of finding as a child my voice and interest in film through a school trip when I was in grade 2 to go watch Where is the Friend's House by Kiarostami that you've seen already as part of this. And at that age, which I was the same age as the boy in the film, was kind of understanding that cinema can be something completely different from everything else that was out there. And then by the time I got to do my own research, a lifetime after that, I was always kind of following and interested in Iranian cinema and the development of it, and then the connection, having had a chance of living in diaspora, understanding how directors who work abroad and directors who work within Iran, how I've closely followed them and have been interested in kind of the voice of women in general. So hopefully that kind of weaves into this, because 10 was also one of the 14 films that I focused on during that PhD that I worked on that turned into that book that Daniel mentioned. So it's quite amazing to kind of looking at a director's work through a retrospective as you're going through it. But it's also interesting because some of the greater films, I don't know, hopefully you've seen a couple of other films on previously shown, or you've seen them elsewhere. 10 sits at a very interesting juncture for how Kiarostami's work kind of developed further. It's basically pretty much his first feature film that he no longer attempted very strongly to have it released within the country. So in a way, you can say to a degree it was an underground film, a term that probably we're a lot more familiar with the recent films coming out of Iran and doing really well internationally. So it has that kind of connection as well as the early 2000s to kind of sit somewhere in between films that were produced within Iran, within the regulations, and films that didn't have to abide to the rules. And this is something that becomes quite interesting, tied to how this film is kind of received as well. So on the surface, the film appears radically simple. Almost the entire film takes place inside a moving car. There are two positions, two angles, showing the passenger and the driver continuously saying the same woman, and her passengers change and the conversations they have within that space. But although this simplicity kind of brings that closeness to the film, 10 itself becomes one of, I think, Kiarostami's, I would like to think, most experimental feature films, because that's his first kind of proper foray into kind of digital cinema and spectatorship. At the same time, it is also notably one of his first films that focuses on a woman's voice and women's everyday experiences. So in this lecture, as Daniel also mentioned, comes at a particularly historical moment. Watching Iranian cinema today inevitably carries a different resonance than it may have done 20 years ago. Discussions around gender, visibility, freedom, censorship, authorship, and bodily autonomy have become impossible to separate from contemporary understandings of Iran, especially after the Women Life Freedom movement since 2022, and the violence and instability shaping the region today. So I think all of these contexts kind of makes us see the film quite differently. But also I'm hoping that we can have kind of a retrospective appreciation of what the film was doing over 20 years ago. So my aim today is not simply to analyze the film formally, but to think through why this film still matters and why it continues to provoke debates and why it remains one of the most probably radical and complicated works of Kiarostami. So although Kiarostami is often discussed through his realism and minimalism, which again, we're playing with those ideas and concepts here as well, I think it is equally important to understand him as a profoundly experimental filmmaker. His experimentation rarely announces itself aggressively or name it in that way. Instead, it often emerges through kind of subtractions, the removal of an element from his narrative certainty, or dramatic montages, or the visual excess. Across his career, Kiarostami repeatedly searched for forms of capable of destabilizing the conventional spectatorship. And I'm quite interested, and hopefully this helps you if you come to your next screening, which is Shirin, to kind of then go even a step further with that. So in contrast, his films leave a gap for us as audience to kind of engage with it, kind of participate within the film. And this participation kind of comes within how he's made the film as well. So this experimentation is already visible in the works of such as Close Up, where documentary and fiction collapse into one another, Taste of Cherry, which radically disrupts narrative closure through the video, epilogue. But beginning in the late 90s and early 2000s, this experimental impulse increasingly became tied to the digital technology as well. But Kiarostami was deeply interested in that digital filmmaking could do to cinema's relationship with reality. Smaller cameras allowed greater intimacy, reduced industrial apparatus, and altered the relationship between filmmaker and a performer, as well as the spectator. The camera could become less dominant or less theatrical and less kind of visible or passive, if you like, as well. Because of especially in this case, they're locked on the dashboard. They're not moving, and therefore our position to the subjects is the same. And that's kind of the extreme intimacy that is created. I do apologize about this very low quality screenshot. It's from a behind-the-scene documentary that Bahman, Kiarostami's son, has made on one of the days, and his other brother has released it on YouTube. So 10 emerges precisely at this kind of transitional moment of kind of moving into kind of digital and embracing it a lot earlier than some perhaps filmmakers of his generation were embracing it. The film is constructed almost entirely through those small digital camera mounted inside a moving car. And this formal decision radically transforms the condition of filmmaking itself. The reduced crew, fixed framing, extended takes, and the relative absence of the director within that situation that is being filmed. If you get a chance, it's on YouTube, do watch that documentary, you kind of understand it. And they are chasing the car. And in that one, actually, Jafar Panahi is there as well, which is quite fascinating. We know they have a long-term collaboration with one another. And the way he talks about it, that it shows that sense of how the actors in the car, that like Monia Akbari's character is actually kind of driving the car. It's not attached like so she's literally driving throughout the city, and the camera is recording it, and the director is outside following the car only to kind of basically for safety. And then it's not necessarily that every take is watched and rewatched. They try and error. So there's an element of remoteness in this kind of collaborative filmmaking. And this positionality of the camera becomes quite central to the experience of the film. This fixed camera does not directly direct our attention in a conventional way. Instead, we begin watching differently, like minor gestures acquire significance. All of a sudden, the pauses, the glances towards the road that we don't get to see as a POV shot. So we never get to see what they see, except one particular shot. And I'm trying to kind of not spoil too much of the content of it, but more looking at it formally. So the emotional intensity of 10 emerges not through montage and dramatic narrative escalation, but through these accumulation and duration of these conversations. And to a degree, there is edit, but it's very kind of minimal because there are various takes that they've done. And they're not shooting it constantly with two cameras. So the conversations we hear, actually, they're recorded separately and then put together. This digital experimentation would remain then central to Kiarostami's later practice as well. Even in his final feature, The 24 Frames, completed shortly before he died, we see that the continuation of this fascination with duration and spectatorship is shown, and also kind of playing with this kind of positionality of the spectator, which we see throughout his films. So at the same time, 10 also marks a major shift with Kiarostami's thematic concern, as we mentioned. Although women certainly appear in his earlier works, 10 is the one that first film that the film structure almost entirely around women's experience, voices, and emotional negotiations. This is one of the reasons, as I mentioned, originally I got to work with the film. Within this kind of discourse and this kind of representation, if you like, of the women narrative, the car, the space that it's taking place, is very central and fundamental. In Iranian cinema, the automobile frequently functions as an intermediary zone between public and private life. And we've seen this, for example, in Taste of Cherry as well. Those kind of intimate conversations all take place within the car. It is simultaneously mobile and is enclosed, exposed yet intimate, the space of the car. So in 10, this liminal quality allows conversations to emerge that might otherwise remain socially unacceptable. So they're not the type of conversations that would be in public. They usually would be in a house. So it's quite an interesting element, because one could say that how come a director that never really focused their lens on women, this is all of a sudden that switch happens. As part of my own research, I'm showing that the 1990s is when the rise of representation of female-centric films have come about. And for example, these are some of the contemporary good examples that came before it by Bani Etemad, Mehjui, Milani, and then Kiarostami. So he's not one of the first who tackles this. But in interviews, we know that he's talked about the fact that he's concerned with realism, and representing realism is in a way that somehow kind of connects itself with authenticity as well. And therefore, because he couldn't show women in their private space, notably at home, in an authentic way, because, for example, we know if within the Iran, the Islamic Republic's rule is that in the public spaces, women have to follow the codes of modesty. Therefore, the screen of cinema becomes a public space, regardless of what topic they're representing. They need to still follow their codes of modesty. So you would have women at home in the kitchen cooking, still wearing the headscarf, while in reality, in an authentic setting, that would not happen. Only in public spaces, although albeit now pushing these boundaries, and in public spaces now women are not wearing hijab as well, but that's what the regulations asked for it. So in a way, instead of thinking that he didn't want to represent, it almost felt like it would have gone against his the style of filmmaking until he found a way to negotiate it. And that finding is that he chose the space of a car, that while it provides the intimacy, provides the privacy, it's still in a public space. So the fact that the women characters are wearing a headscarf, it's okay because in public space they're supposed to. It's not that we need to kind of suspend our disbelief that, okay, they're in bed, but she's wearing a headscarf. We accept it, which we do with some other films. So this is important that Tern marked one of the clearest moments of change for him and bringing this subjectivity, the female subjectivity film. And it does something that easily putting next to some of really good, amazing kind of critical films that bring different voices of women, it brings a different perspective and it brings a more immediate version of it, something that it actually pushes the boundary further as well, kind of beyond those limits. And this tension that it made by Kiarostami but it opens itself to the world of female perspective, female frustration, and shows that survival as well. This is why I studied the film alongside these Iranian women's cinema, not because authorship was simple, but because the film's social and cinematic energy comes from a woman's presence, and especially from Monia Akbari's presence, which I'll explain shortly as well. So the car is crucial to how TEN works. It is neither fully private nor public. It moves through Tehran's streets, but it also becomes a temporary interior, almost like a confessional space. This is one of Kiarostami's most important formal discoveries. The car allows that private conversation to take place. In the opening sequence, Monia drives while arguing with her son, Amina Maher, who was then a child. The camera remains fixed. We do not see Monia for so much of the exchange with this child's. We only see his face and his anger, his judgment, his refusal to accept his mother's divorce. This scene is remarkable because the family conflict is not staged in a domestic interior, but inside a moving vehicle. And the home has effectively moved into the city, the same way that kind of the patriarchal baggage or weight is now transported and put into the shoulders of a child. This is where TEN becomes so powerful. The private wounds of a marriage, divorce, and motherhood, and social judgment is exposed through the movement of the car. Tehran is always present, but is not presented through conventional establishing shots. Instead, the city enters through sound, movement, glances, interruptions, traffic in the background. We also need to speak, of course, more carefully about Monia Akbari's role. She's not simply acting in a conventional sense. While she's performing a version of herself, she's also drawing on the lived experiences, bodily presence, and emotional memory alongside her loved ones, like sister, son. Her performance carries the film forward. This is especially important in the scenes with her child, Amina, as I mentioned, who is now a trans woman artist themselves and a filmmaker. The open argument is therefore not only a mother-child scene within a fictional situation, it is also a recording of a real relational tension. Later made even more complex by Amina Maher's own artistic life and self-representation. Maher's later work, including, I have the poster on, Letter to My Mother from 2019, it's a short kind of self-reflexive documentary, returns to the questions of family trauma and gender and the body, which gives these scenes in TEN, and they use scenes from the film in their short film, in TEN adding a kind of a retrospective weight to that conversation, as if that's kind of their childhood represented on screen. So the child's anger in the first sequence is not abstract. He repeats patriarchal accusations that his mother should not have divorced, that she has failed in her role, and the father's position has moral authority. Monia's response are restrained, frustrated, sometimes defensive, sometimes also exhausted. The car becomes the space in which patriarchy is reproduced through the voice of a child, but also resisted by a woman who refuses to despair, and she's the one who remains throughout the film. So, but 10 is not only important because of what it says, I think it's also important through how it is made. The digital camera changes the entire grammar of the film. Kiarostami strips cinema back almost to its singular shot, 2 fixed camera angles. The result is a cinema of duration, pressure, and the one that requires a lot of attention. The film's digital form allows for a different kind of performance because the camera is small and fixed, and they can roll for a lot longer than you would on low-budget film, shot on film. And this kind of allowing, kind of working together, just the 2 actors in a car, kind of, it brings an element to it, which is quite fascinating, at times very uncomfortable for us. It's imagining the 2 people are having a private conversation, and you go and sit a meter away from them and don't move. So we constantly are in their space and observing what's going on. So this is where Kiarostami's formal experimentations matters. The film does not use digital technology simply because it is cheaper or easier. It uses the digital to rethink authorship because of how small it is. It can actually be that. Otherwise, you needed to recreate a fake dashboard, a fake car. And none of these situations are fake. The actual woman is driving, going through having these heated conversations. Health and safety are another thing that one could talk about, which, especially if you watch the behind the scenes, you see there's not a lot of considerations on that side. So you use the digital cinema to rethink authorship, presence, realism, and control. The director withdraws or appears to withdraw, and the film becomes an experiment in what happens when cinema listens or allows it to play its time. The spectator is no longer guided through the scenes in a conventional way. Instead, the films demand an active and ethically attentive mode of looking and listening. Thinking about kind of the authorship and kind of the controversy that Daniel mentioned as well. So at the same time, any contemporary discussions of 10, of course, we need to also acknowledge Monia Akbari's claims about the film, including her argument that her creative contribution has been erased and her allegations against Kiarostami as well. Though I'm not going to address the allegations, like it's not, we are unable to kind of defer anything on that ground. But in terms of the collaborative element of it, perhaps it's quite an interesting one because it's not a fully scripted film. It is very much so improvised by taking elements from the real life of Monia Akbari. So there's quite interesting grounds there, and we could have nice conversations about it to think, how do we gauge this? Having said that, I do not want to reduce this talk to the controversy, but I also do not want to speak about 10 as though these questions do not exist. In fact, they make the film more urgent to discuss carefully. The question becomes, what does it mean to celebrate a film about women's voice if the woman at its center later says her own voice and labor were not fully recognized? So rather than treating 10 as a closed auteurist object of study, we might approach it as a contested film, a film that remains formally radical and historically important, but whose meaning is now inseparable from questions of collaboration, gendered labor, and the politics of recognition. And the documentary, the behind the scene, it's called A Day from Filming 10. If you Google search it, you can find it. It's quite an interesting, and it's one of the scenes with a girl with a white scarf that has shaved her head. And we actually see that whole pan out and see how they filmed it. It's quite a good reference to kind of go and see that to what degree, where does authorship lies. In terms of kind of artistry and decisions of where and how this is panned out, we can really see the track record of work that Kiarostami has done. And this is something that it's quite fascinating, and we see this to come out of his other films. Elements of it then kind of transports itself to his later films, like from Where's the Friend's House to Close Ups to Taste of Cherry to 10. There's definitely a progression in terms of, if you like, storytelling. And also, 2 years after the production of 10, Kiarostami returned to these questions directly in 10 on 10, a film that effectively transforms the making of 10 and referencing Taste of Cherry into a mediation on cinema itself. Driving again through Tehran, Kiarostami reflects on directing, editing, spectatorship, realism, and digital technology. What becomes particularly striking is the extent to which he embraces reduction as a cinematic strategy. For him, the removal of those kind of, what we know kind of industrial apparatus creates the possibility of a more attentive and less authoritarian cinema. The digital camera becomes a means of rethinking control. This is why 10 occupies such a pivotal position in his career. It is part of a much broader attempt to rethink what cinema can become once freed from its certain institutional and formal expectations associated with like traditional, conventional, mainstream filmmaking. And trying to kind of bring some of these ideas to a close, watching 10 today, of course, inevitably produces different resonance than it may have done in 2002. Because it certainly has a different meaning for myself that I was analyzing and writing about it back in 2010 as well. So, but at the same time, the importance of it is not reduced. In fact, it's having different layers of importance added to it, particularly besides the condition of its production, what it's trying to do. I think following the Women Life Freedom movement and amid the continuing violence and the repression that we're seeing and witnessing with the wars in the region, is that film's attention to women's movement through urban space acquires a kind of renewed political significance, and something that we can see that actually the film was doing a lot more than perhaps we were able to see at the time. Monia Akbari driving through Tehran, speaking, negotiating, resisting, enduring, now feels inseparable from longer histories of Iranian women's struggles over visibility and autonomy and self-representation. So to properly try to conclude, I argue that 10 occupies a unique importance and a place within Kiarostami's career and in the broader historical history of digital cinema. It is a film that positions across multiple thresholds simultaneously, perhaps between the conversations between analog and digital image making, between fiction and documentary, public and private space and negotiations, authorship and collaboration, and between social realism and formal experimentation. Again, those are some of the key concerns of a lot of Iranian filmmakers. Through an extraordinary process of reduction, Kiarostami constructed a cinematic form built around these aspects. The fixed digital camera transforms not only the film's aesthetic language, but also the spectator's relationship to that performance. At the same time, the film's afterlife continues to reshape how it is understood. For these reasons, 10 remains not only a landmark within Kiarostami's oeuvre, but also one that defining works of early digital cinema. And ultimately, I think 10 transforms a moving car into a kind of laboratory of realism, one that we've seen that at least within the Iranian cinema been adapted and reused by other great directors. And it's quite, I find this quite fascinating, but at the same time trying to create this little globe that for a moment, back in 2002, we could get a glimpse of some of the concerns of women in Iran. Perhaps you could say a middle class, but there are kind of a couple of glimpses of other different classes within the conversations as well. And I think I'll bring this, I hope, not too scattered talk to an end, and we'll sit down and watch it together, and hopefully we'll have a good conversation afterwards. Thank you.
I guess, just wait one more second. I guess maybe the one thing, if we stick within the narrative world of the film for a second, because obviously there's also another story outside of the film. I think what's very shocking about the film is the level of aggression that the son has towards his mother. That's obviously, I mean, we get the sense that's also kind of feeding off the father, and the kind of, the souring of the relationship between his parents. But also in a sense, we're seeing how kind of, let's say, a patriarchal society is inculcated as well. I don't know if you had thoughts about this.
Especially, I think the very first time we see him, it almost feels like everything he says is very much so things that he's heard from his father in the interactions leading up to the divorce and separation, that we definitely see there. But also a little bit of a maybe cultural context here, which is a little bit odd for a culture that is quite very polite. In fact, a lot of TV comedy elements, and I think that's what the aunt refers to when she talks about he was being rude to the grandmother, and that was the line he was crossing it, is that around the time late 90s, early 2000s, there's a lot of kind of comedy family TV shows that unfortunately had a lot of children represented that would be a little bit out of line, and
foul-mouthed children on TV.
Which somehow, some of it, I think it's also part of that, but then ingrained with that kind of patriarchal kind of putting his mom down, and being angry with her. I really like, I don't know if you see that, not the very last scene, the one before that they actually have a very kind of happy conversation, but
joking
in a way,
around as well.
Joking around, and was very loving, and but in a way Moniaz was poking him, and then he went and got angry and started shouting at her as well. So it was just kind of that vulnerability of this as well. Is almost kind of like trying to see the representation of it is that who's suffering here, and it's through the conversation is the mother trying to justify what she's done, but at the same time I think the film is trying to represent that nevertheless the child is suffering, and we see it through his aggression that is represented.
Yeah, there's this also very striking moment in the first scene where the son just starts saying, "I don't believe you, I don't believe you." And I mean, with the recent kind of discourse around the film, that also seems to have almost an added layer, because we as spectators are also kind of I don't know, impelled to ask ourselves, who are we believing here? Or do we believe, or don't we? So, I mean, I felt like that's almost, it's intriguing at least that that's already prefigured, let's say, in the relationship between the mother and her son.
Yeah. I agree, but at the same time, the film is not trying to say it's a documentary. For example, I think one sequence that is completely fabricated, because the relationships are not in the same form, and it's the only moment that the film kind of moves away from the two shots. It's with the prostitute's character, which is clearly written and
a scripted
performed.
scene. Yeah.
So that's the kind of, but acknowledging that in the first time post-revolution, almost to acknowledge that women doing this job, and having a screen presence that way as well. But at the same time, as I say, it's a lot of it is fiction. But with those people who are actually in a proper mother-son-sister relationship, it becomes a bit blurred and complicated.
But that also makes it precisely a film that fits into Kiarostami's oeuvre, since this is precisely what he's interested in working in throughout, like from film after film after film. This is really a progression from the films we've already seen, particularly the films of the 90s, where there is that constant blurring of the lines between fiction and documentary, and the spectator is like, what am I watching here? Am I watching, a fictional world? Am I watching a documentary? Or is it something like that is kind of sui generis in a sense? Yeah. Okay, Björn has the microphone, so if there are questions from the audience, I'd love to hear them. Alex, over here.
Yes, because you were just talking about it, I read that the scene with the prostitute was filmed, the only scene that had to be filmed with an actress, because they couldn't find anyone who would, like a prostitute who would be okay with being filmed and stuff like that. And at the beginning, you talked about how Kiarostami said that he couldn't film women before because they had to be veiled up. And I think it's very interesting that there maybe is like a contradiction between saying, oh, I can't film them because it wouldn't be authentic, and then putting something very not authentic in it because it was the only way to do it. And I would be interested how you would say that this change happened.
Another thing to add, I completely agree. But again, I'm not saying that Kiarostami acknowledging that. In general, as someone who kind of works with films, I enjoy talking to directors, and I really enjoy seeing how they see and talk about their films. But at the same time, I think we also need to kind of separate that element from how we experience it, because every single one of us will understand them differently. The manipulation of, I think, that kind of fact and fiction is something that he's been doing really well, and he's been doing it quite we often name that he's working with non-professional actors, but in a lot of his films he has a lot of professional actors as well, and those are the key people who drive the narrative forward. So I don't think from that bigger picture it's not necessarily contradictory. And Monia as well is not she's a performing artist before this film came out. So in a way, she's also a professional actress. So that element, but she is acting as a mother with her son in that situation. So from the general speaking about his work, I don't think it's contradictory. It's actually very much so spot on what he does. The same way, one of the things that always remains with me is the story of the very authentic crying we see in Where's the Friend's Home, which we know the story about it, that the photograph that was taken and then the photograph was torn in front of him, so he genuinely was crying for something else, but he was crying genuinely. So finding ways, whether we find these ethical lines crossing. But I think in this film, it feels like there's a lot that is coming. There's a lot of conversations, hints at issues that are quite prevalent in the Iranian society, and acknowledging sex work is quite an interesting, and I think he goes far enough to even break the rule of point of view. And now that the behind the scene, you know it, that the car that is parked that basically creates the lighting for the scene. It's an SUV, kind of what we call patrol, whatever. That's actually his own car, which is known, and we see it in a lot of. And the other car, now I actually think probably is Panahi, who picks her up. So it's a very kind of staged situation that is created to show, but illustrate something that people who live, I'm sure people in Tehran have experienced seeing this happening, and it's not necessarily one part of Tehran. Actually, in the uptown area that he's filming, I grew up 3 streets from there and have seen it happen as well. So it's not necessarily inauthentic in terms of what we see, whether it would have happened or not, but you're right that it's fabricated. And that's the whole, I think, basically links back to everything he's done, that he makes us feel it's real, but in a way it's very masterfully put together. Not necessarily, it's not a reportage or documentary that we're seeing.
Thank you.
If I can quickly jump in, you mentioned, of course, that this is a film, in a sense, the first film that Kiarostami makes where he is less concerned with, is it going to get through the authorities, the censorship system in Iran, or he's going directly to a kind of international audience. It's going to film festivals, going to Cannes, and so on and so forth. But what was the fate of the film in Iran? Did it get screened? What did it lead to? Kind of public discourse around it and around some of the kind of, particularly its representation and depiction of women characters.
I don't believe it's had an official screening, but definitely I bought a bootleg version of it, so you could find it, and it was quite big to kind of easily access films. And in fact, much later, the cinema house Khane Cinema was trying to help filmmakers so their films don't just get released. And in fact, films that became banned or I don't think even went for a full-on getting permission. And I don't believe they even had permission to shoot. The camera is never outside, so they were not breaching any of the kind of regulations. But definitely it's been seen. It is in discourse. And around the same time, for example, this is 2002, 2003, 2004, there are other films as well that we would see similar pressing, kind of crossing the line by depicting women without a scar who've shaved their heads. For example, like there was a time that as if it's the hair that needs to be covered, as long as there's no hair, so you can show it. For example, I don't know, another film that has been limited releases is like for women prison. That also depicts a character that shaves her head in the prison. So there's these elements there that I think there are connections, and once one director has done it, I'm not saying that the director of Women's Prison has copied this element there, but I'm just saying that, but it was in the conversations.
I mean, Offside by Panahi is also made shortly after this as well.
Exactly.
Where we have the same kind of tension.
But we even hear about it, right? Mm-hmm. Like the sister talking about that now he's old, his father has to take him to the match because I can't take him to the match. Almost even that element is mentioned here, which then becomes the thread of a very successful feature film. Yeah.
Further questions from the crowd?
Maybe there is something that I didn't want to mention it to kind of draw your attention if it was your first time watching it. There's something that I really, really enjoy every time I see the film is that the number of cars that pass by and notice there's a camera on the dashboard and they're like, what's that? and they didn't mind it. And most of those shots actually are with the sun, which must have been the most complicated scenes to film. The scenes with the sun are almost the only scenes that have edits in the middle of them as well. But nevertheless, they've kept all of those. That's something that, again,
gives that sense of it is a private, makes it for me even more so that it's a private space that people are coming and looking into it as if someone's looking into someone's door. So to me, that kind of breaking that fourth wall is actually helpful.
Yeah, I mean, there are also moments where there is almost a kind of subtending threat there as well. That, I don't know, I thought there was one moment where there's a car full of guys who are like leering at, and it almost felt like what's going to happen here. Like there was almost this kind of, at least kind of ominous menace at certain points. But the issue of the editing is also really fascinating because, as you said, we do see particularly with the shots of the suns and like jump cuts within the scene, and perhaps that's partly just to try and patch together something continuous out of like different like takes. But the very fact of having a jump cut creates a momentary sense in a spectator of like, this is a film I'm watching for a start. And alerts us a little bit too. This is a film where I think we're always a little bit thinking about the manner of filming. And these are shots that actually are ordinarily not actually possible in traditional modes of filmmaking with the big 35mm camera and so on and so forth. Kiarostami is also not in the vehicle with them. He's kind of, in some other space. And then, there's also this interesting question of who do we see at any given moment? Do we see Mania? Do we see the passengers? She's withheld from us from actually a really long time at the start.
About 16 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. It takes, we hear her voice, we definitely feel her presence, but we don't actually see her until like a big chunk of the way in the film. So I know it raises so many questions about the filmmaking process as well.
Exactly, but just to kind of add to that, to me, this is something that he's pushed it further. This kind of allowing us to see, or in a way, I even said that it's not using the conventional ways of directing us what to see, but in a way, he's very much so directing us what to see, because he's not giving us a lot of other choices. But he does that in his other films. The other film that this feels like a very good next step from it is Taste of Cherry, for example, the conversation of the telephone call, or elements that happen that we stay in the car, or when the character goes to his house, we don't go. So almost kind of preventing you, the kind of that Lacanian kind of wanting to know the hidden kind of image that he's playing with here, even with the two shot. And when do we see which side of the conversation? He's very much so making us to understand what's going on. But at the same time, I think it's a commentary on that kind of voice and agency of the female character protagonist here. Because at the start, she's being bombarded with all sorts of derogatory things. We even understand the complications of divorce, because she had to kind of pretend or lie that her husband is, like all the kind of the steps that you would know in the kind of oppressive society does exist. But in that case, also the film starts kind of making you feel like, okay, you're saying that, but you're not even showing her. It almost feels like the film is preventing us to even see her, but then it turns and makes her to be more of a center of the attention. And we realize that actually it is her space. We are seeing her, even though maybe at times camera is not on her. So I think it's a quite a clever way of kind of thinking about politics of representation, that how it's been kind of economically presented here, very minimalistly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, Pamida.
I was wondering why she acted or reacted so differently to these two different women who both lost their loved one. With one of them, she was a bit like, don't be pathetic, like, get your shit together. And with the other one, she was more like, oh, yeah, it's okay, we all lose someone at some point. And I was wondering if it's because she has the same contradictions within herself, like she also at times feels weak and broken, and then at times feels a bit rebel, like the woman who shaved her head and feels brave about losing her loved ones, and or like why was this incoherent reaction?
Thank you. I was going to ask you yourself to kind of tell me how do you interpret it, which I think you actually have offered a very interesting way of interpreting that. What do these two women who go through a breakup represent here? And it's the two sides of her. So also kind of saying she's a multidimensional person. She could get angry. So that's in the same vein, I like it when she gets angry at her son and shouts at him, because that's what a human being would be at some point. At some point you get angry and you shout back, or you're supportive when you need to be. But I might add another layer to it, that the first one is her sister, so she knows her really deeply. So she basically wants exactly what she wants for herself, for her, and she allows herself to express it that bluntly. While the other girl, they became acquainted in the mausoleum when they were visiting. So I think there's an element of courtesy and distance that she's dealing with her trauma. But at the same time, also, she shows more of an agency by having had cut her hair and changed her appearance, which I think she was celebrating it too. I don't know. It's just, again, we are interpreting it from our perspectives, right? Yeah.
Any more questions? Yep. Yeah, I can.
It's maybe not a question, but more of an observation. The interactions with the son. I missed like the beginning of your introduction, but what you said stuck with me, that the son's voice is also like the voice of patriarchy in a bit, and I found it very, like, I was like, same. Like, it felt really very like different layers of patriarchy that you have to live through as a woman. Like the first interaction where the son is like, don't shout, I can't listen to you, you're too loud, is like basically tone policing, which is like we all, well, maybe not everybody, but we live through. And then it's like this also this playful interaction later on in the film, kind of like you're trying to barter with the patriarchy. How do you live with the patriarchy? Because you have to live with it, like we live in it. And yeah, it was like sort of like a bittersweet thing, because you also see it like through her son, and I also really felt for the son, because going through divorce as a child is super difficult, and it's like normal to be angry at the parents and also at the mother and at the father. Also, he's probably also angry at the father, but he doesn't show it. But it also feels like there's very many layers that women have to live through in patriarchy, and I didn't really see a resolution what to do is best. And it's also like in real life, like I haven't found a resolution what's best. So that's just my observation. I thought it was very, very cleverly, very well shown in the film. Really, really touched me. Yeah.
If I could add to that as well, another layer of which I think always troubles me, but in the same way I appreciate it that it's depicting it. Because I believe in our society, patriarchy is not always carried or applied just by men. A lot of women are complicit in keeping the patriarchy upholded. And even we see it here too. In order to justify the son going back to his father, is constantly repeating to themselves that he needs to grow up with a man. Like, keep on talking about it like that. And it's just, why does it need to be this black and white, and not seeing it
that a mother can be a father can be a mother. Like that's it. Why are we deciding certain attributes are for one of the genders than not the other? So to me, even the conversation really always upsets me when they think they're justifying it, because of course it's a boy, he needs to grow up with a man. So they are actually upholding this kind of persist in the society. Yeah, so just add to it that it shows that kind of reality quite well. Yeah.
Any more questions? I have maybe one last question before we break up, because it is getting a little bit late, but you've been real troopers. But it's a really banal question. What is your reading of the countdown clock that structures the film? Because I found it interesting. I mean, first of all, the fact that the scenes or sequences are numbered, and secondly, that rather than going up from 1 to 10, it goes down from 10 to 1. I don't know. Have you thought about that? Have you can you interpret that? Does it affect our response to the film?
I think it's part of it. Also, its life carries on. I always see it that way, but there's also kind of the episodic films from different new waves in the world as well. I think that they're fragments of life, so it's not attempting to kind of show us an arc and change, instead tapping in different moments in their life. So I think it's effective in that sense. Why is it counting down? I don't think it's just because to me, I never actually, this is a good question, I've never questioned the countdown. The numbers, to me, make sense because it almost feels like, let's see what happens on Tuesday, and that's now, the way our memories work as well, we take fragments from different times, but the countdown, I always assume with it the same way that as if the life hasn't started, like the countdown at the start when movies used to have the countdown.
Yeah.
It almost...
Yep. At the start of a reel to have the
exactly.
countdown.
So it's just saying that it hasn't started yet. It will start when it zeros. So I always assumed it's connecting to that element of, so we're just seeing those fragments till the actual narrative or the actual life starts. It almost feels like we sit here, watch that, and when we walk out of this theater, that's when the actual story starts. But I haven't put too much thought into it, except putting it in those kind of parallels that we see these fragmented storytelling rather than a continuous storytelling.
Yeah. Do we get a sense? Do you feel that life starts anew for Mounier as well in the films Mounier?
Now that I've seen it.
No. I mean, like in the narrative. Like, are we getting a sense of at the end of the film, like, there's a possibility of a restart for her or a kind of new, I don't know. I
mean, it feels like, to me, she has started her new life. It's just getting everybody around her understand it. I think it's there. But it looks like actually she doesn't go far with the son. Because nevertheless, the last moment he comes in and says, I want to go to grandma's house. He still doesn't want to go to her house. So in that sense, I don't think she goes that far. But that's just my observation, I don't know, or my feeling. How do you read it?
No, I think that I agree. I think that, but I do, yeah, I mean, there is a sense in this film of like new things starting, let's say. I think that on many levels, like that's, I think, hopefully for the character, I think maybe this is a promise that was, let's say, dashed, but, for women in Iran. At that time, there was some hope for reform and like in a positive direction.
Of it, yeah.
I guess the end of the period of a kind of reformist tendency. And then, but like also a new start for the cinema and like the possibilities of digital cinema. Or also maybe promises dashed, but that's another conversation. What new possibilities could be opened up by digital technology? So anyway, that's all we have time for. Please join me in thanking Maryam for presenting the film and discussing it with us. We'll be back in 3 weeks' time with Nega Motaheda talking to us about Shirin. I think also actually a great partner film to 10. Again, a real focus on women and faces.
And it's even more
spaces.
formalist in that.
And pushing the experimentation even further, but really urge you all to come along to that. And for those Goethe-Uni students in the room, we will also be meeting up tomorrow morning with Maryam for our New Perspectives in Iranian Cinema seminar at 10 a.m. in the film seminar room in the E.J. Farben building. So, some of you are already enrolled in the course, but anyone is also welcome to drop by if you want to keep on discussing Iranian cinema with Maryam. So hopefully either see you tomorrow or see you in 3 weeks' time for the continuation of the series. Bye-bye.
Thank you.